Welcome back to Road to Kerbin. This is episode 5 and you find me on the launch pad, and this does not look like a rocket. We're actually just going to quickly do a task, which was some testing of rocket parts. So let's just do that. We fired those, completed a load of experiments. Great, we get some money for that, we get some science. I think this episode we're going to actually try and explore Rhode a little bit more. We've got Lure to go and have a look at, we've got some contracts for that, but let's have a look at Rhode because I don't even know what this thing really looks like. Right, roll the intro. Well, before we do anything, we have some science to spend, and I think we're going to go for flight control because I want to use some RCS, and that gives me RCS. And I think then we're going to throw a bit of something into this enhanced stability just because it gets me to the simple command modules, and I really want to get Kerbals involved. So let's do that. Right, let's go build something, I think. Right, so we're gonna, you can see here I've sped this up. I've basically put together this craft that is going to be our eyes in the sky. It's going to be scanning the terrain. So we've got a dish on the top there that's measuring the altitude of the terrain, and inside the little tiny sort of cargo bay in the middle there, we've got the scanner for the visual and biomes, and that will open up and give us access to that because it's a bit of an odd shape. Putting both on a craft a little difficult. I'm concerned about the amount of electricity we've got. I think we should be okay. Even if they're only running partially, we might turn them on and off and things like that. But we've strapped as much solar power as we can to this thing, but I don't want to go any more overkill to it. So one of the things you can actually see me doing here is that we're actually using a combination of the sort of mirror settings and the symmetry settings. Sometimes what you have to do is actually rotate the part that you're going to put the mirror stuff onto so that you get it in the right orientation to get your mirroring how you want. So you see that back section that I've done with solar panels? That required that we actually rotated the little cargo section there around 90 degrees before fixing them, and if you try and do it any other way, they sit in the wrong position. So that was the way we did that. And then it's a case of sticking a fairing on it, and we're going to put underneath it the rocket that we've actually used before. You saw this go to Armstrong, and we're actually going to stick an extra stage on it and fire it up. So we're going to try and reuse that design, but of course we've got to make the fairing match, so it's going to go black. So let's get on with this. Right, welcome to the launch pad. We're just going to fire off and go, I think. So we have so far pretty much gone into orbit in an equatorial plane. This craft we are not sending equatorially. In fact, we want to do the exact opposite. We want to send it into a polar orbit. So we're going to go south first. Just because, it doesn't matter which way I'm going to go south though. So why are we going south? Well, first of all, we're going to do a semi-polar orbit. I don't really need to focus too much on it being polar. That's not vitally important. But what we do want is a high inclination, because we want to cover as much of the planet as we go around as possible. And if we go equatorial, we're only ever going to cover the equator. If we go into a sort of semi-polar orbit, as the planet rotates underneath us, we get to see as much of it as possible. As long as we don't get into an odd resonance sort of orbit, we're actually great. The big problem about this is, though, that actually our communication setup is not great for this. It is what we could say problematic. So that's not a great thing. So we're going to have to be aware of that. We have about 2 megabytes of storage on the hard drive on this craft, which is not going to be enough to store data as it orbits around. So for the start of this sort of craft's life, it is not going to give out every piece of data it does when it comes over the KSC. Also, its journey over the KSC is going to be, variable, shall we say. It's not always going to come over at the right time. We're not going to get great signal. So we're likely to have some problems. But what we can do now is we're actually going to ride our way up to Apple Apps, and we're just gonna just try and let it just bring itself over a little bit. There we go. So what we want to do is we want to circularize, and we're trying to aim for an orbit about 70 kilometers because that's the optimal orbital altitude for these scanners. What we can do is actually move this down here. We can actually jettison the fairings first, and you can see that we've got our antenna there. We'll get those extended because I think we're outside the atmosphere now. And what we're going to do is we're just going to give ourselves a little bit of the rocket thrust. So there we go. We've given ourselves, I think we just collected some science there. That's quite cool. So obviously going polar, we've got some science from the launch site area, which is quite nice. Now 70 is very low, and we're going to have a little trade-off here, because we're going to put it into 70, but then I'm going to have a think about it, because the higher it is, the longer we get signal, which means the more mapping we can do until we get a communication system. So we're going to need to, in the future, put a communication system up, because this is just not going to work without it. So I think our next set of launches is going to be some sort of communication system. But even then, if this thing is over the horizon, this is far north, far south, we're going to have trouble with communication. So we need to be aware of that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to ride this up a little bit, fire some engine, until we get to a nice, there we go, a nice apoaps type point. And we're going to put ourselves, I think, on the prograde, and that's going to do that. And we're going to let it go over a little bit. We're just going to let it coast along a bit. We've got a lot of fuel here, a lot of delta V, but we don't have much orbital speed. So we're just going to fire it full bore when I get near. So probably about, let's see, now. There we go. So we're going to start falling back down now. So we want to just tip our nose up, like so. Try and counteract some of that falling. There we go. Just doing that. You can probably hear the clicks in the background. Just try and pull it up just a little bit. There we go. And we're going to pull it up and up and up and up. Gonna pull it. We're into orbit. Now it's about refining that orbit. We don't really want to leave that up there. So we've now left a stage in orbit that I didn't really want to do, but we'll see. Let's see what happens. Can we get this up a bit more? Right, we're falling. That's okay. Right. So now I want to position this craft in radial out. In fact, I want to go radial out, because I want to cancel out that upward movement that that downward movement we've got. I want to try and circularize what we're doing. So we're going to do that. We're going to do this, pull this over here, and we're trying to do this as quickly as possible, which is not the healthiest way of doing it. Come on. Oh, we've got it stuck on. Note to self. Remember when you've actually turned on prograde, because it fights you, and then you wonder why you've got phantom forces going on. So we're going to go radial out, and you'll see we're actually losing altitude at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do this, with the idea being that it's actually going to take some of our apoaps height and turn it into periaps height. We're going to circularize a little bit of where we are. So there we go, just doing that, and we've got it like so. So that's a little better, but we could really do with a bit more prograde, actually, couldn't we? Just get the prograde going, so we can actually use a bit of prograde now. And we're just going to put a little bit of prograde in. I think we've lost signal. We have lost signal, so we can't do anything. So we managed to get that burning just in time. So we're going to leave the craft like this. We're going to open up its systems, or like so, and we're going to turn on its cameras and everything else. We're gonna orientate it so it sort of at least faces the right way. There we go. Just spin it around. Can I spin? Can I do the spinny spin? I'm not sure. We don't have any control at all. Okay. So this thing's just going to do its scanning now. Now, in reality, it would have to obviously face down to the planet, and what it would actually have is it would have a slight rotation on it that would equal its rotational speed around the planet. So it was always facing in the same direction. We're not going to do that. We do have persistent rotation installed, but I don't need to worry too much about that. So we're going to leave that where it is, and I think we need to put up some sort of communication system, because yeah, this thing is not going to be great until we can actually send data back. So I'm willing to bet that its hard drive is going to fill up pretty quickly. What have we got? Capacity running down there, if you can see it already, and we are pretty much out of capacity. There we go. So no storage space left. Data's overloaded. So let's go and sort out our comms system. But if we're going to do that, we need to think about how low we can actually put our orbit and still communicate. So I think we're going to have to do some for science. Let's get some for science done first on communication systems. Right, science time. So you want to put up a satellite constellation, you want to communicate around the planet, but you don't want what we've got on the right hand side of this little diagram where the signal's going to go through the planet. You also really don't want it to go through the atmosphere, so we want something that looks like it's on the left. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, let's have a look. We're actually only going to look at 2 satellites here, because as long as 2 of them can communicate, then the rest should if they're equally spaced out. So what we can actually see is we've got a triangle. We've got a triangle between the 2 satellites and the center of the planet, with the signal between them running down the long side there, okay? It's a right angle triangle. Yeah, that's the hypotenuse. But we can actually simplify it. The blue line there is actually the distance from the center of the planet to the lowest point on that signal's path. Now, if that point is above the surface of the planet, above the atmosphere of the planet, we're okay. If that isn't, we can't have a signal go through it. So we can simplify that though. We can actually break that down into a simpler triangle. You can see this, we've got it even smaller now. And that triangle, yeah, it's a right angle triangle. And that means we can actually do some Pythagoras, we can do some trigonometry with it. Important thing to remember, we now know we've got a right angle triangle. We can work out the angle, the brown angle there, and we can also work out one side because we know the height above the surface of our satellite and the radius of the planet because we've worked that out before. So with that, we can figure out, using a bit of trigonometry, if we take h as being the height above the surface plus the radius of the planet, and a, that angle, that brown angle, is equal to 180 divided by a number of satellites, or you can do 360 divided by 2 times the number of satellites. So you can do this with more than 4 satellites. You can work it out like that. If we take those numbers and we plug them in, we can say the distance of the blue line, the length of it, is equal to h times cos A. Okay, you need to get a calculator out and work that out, or get it in a spreadsheet. But if you do that, you can figure out the blue line. If you know the length of that blue line, as long as the blue line's length is bigger than the radius of the planet and its atmosphere on top, which you've worked out, you can add the 2 together, you're okay. If it isn't, well, your signal's going through the planet. Okay, science done. So we need to put a constellation up that does that. Let's get on with it. Right, so now we know exactly how far, let's just launch this from our talk as we go up. So now we know exactly how far up we need to orbit to actually be able to communicate with our 4 satellite system. So we're launching another one of these rockets that we've just launched. The actual launch in first and second stage is the same as we just launched our Acuity 1 on, and this is Community 1. This is 4 communication satellites. Inside that fairing we have 4 communication satellites. Unlike Acuity 1, we're actually not going to go polar, we're going to go equatorial, because we want a nice equatorial communication system so that we can communicate with the KSC. And so we're just going to come over, and what I'm actually doing is I'm just trying to learn a little bit more about the launch profile of this thing, and it's actually very interesting because, you know, it's not like Earth where it's a long burn. This is a small planet. It's not even like Kerbin. Kerbin takes longer. I actually have to turn this over very quickly, it seems, before I go anywhere. Otherwise I end up with the sort of stop-start launch. The gravity turn is much more abrupt and sudden. You have to get over quickly. So we're just going up and we're getting out of the thick stuff into the nice thin stuff where our engines are going to just be a little bit more efficient, going to give us more bang for our buck. We've got a very high thrust on this craft, and what I want to try and do is actually get it so that we're actually going to pop into orbit. Now I could go straight up, which is probably not a bad idea. So I think we're going to stay high. The problem is we actually want to get into a nice high orbit of about 300 kilometers, but we have the risk of losing signal. So I'm not in a hurry to get high from here. So we're just going to keep it going as it is. And what I want to do is actually get some horizontal speed in as quickly as possible. So we can see now that we're about to lose the main engines, and actually I'm going to move our thing back there a bit. We're going to lose our main engines any second now. 4 seconds. We want to pull our nose down a bit. What we're going to try and do, there we go, fire the second stage. We're going to try and get as circular as possible. I want to try and get this craft into a pretty circular 300 kilometer orbit. That would be ideal if we could just put it straight into a 300 kilometer orbit circular. I don't think we'll manage that because of the fact we've got communications issues. But if we can do that, that'd be superb. Once we're in that 300 kilometer orbit, and that might take a while, You'll notice I'm overburning at the moment, so I'm actually going to have to burn inwards to try and balance that out. And so we're doing like a radial in burn as we actually go into orbit, which is a bit crazy actually. We're basically going to try and get into a circular orbit, then we can set up our resonance orbit once we've got that circular orbit going, because we'll know what our period is then. We could do a maths for it, we could do more science in this episode, but I don't think you're ready for it. I think we'll maybe save that for another episode. Right, so speed you up a bit, because what I'm actually doing here is I'm burning radially in, and that's going to change the position, the amount of energy, the height of my periaps and apoaps, depending upon where I do it. What I'm trying to do is, first of all, bring my apoaps down to that sort of 300 range that I'm looking for, whilst also then getting some more height into my periaps. I want to lift that up because I want a generally circular-ish orbit to start from. I've already said we're trying to actually get this into a sort of circular orbit so we can see its period. We don't want to do the maths on it yet. We could actually maths this and identify for a given altitude of this craft what would its orbital period be, but instead we're going to do it the old-fashioned way, as you might do in Kerbal. So you see here I've unfurled the actual craft, got rid of the shrouds. We've got our solar cells giving us energy now, so we can go around as much as we want. And what we're going to try and do is get to a point where this apoaps is actually near the KSC, because what I want to do is get signal and then circularize this orbit. So that's what we're going to do to start with. We're going to bring ourselves along, we fire our little engine, and we've got loads of delta V axion on this craft, so it's not a big issue. I say loads, we've got enough. This is actually quite a large payload for this rocket. And I think I'm going to try and continue to use this rocket. I think particularly for manned craft, this launch stage is actually, something we might just reuse this design. And I don't want to try and generate brand new craft every time I'm building something. So I'm going to try and reuse some of these craft and stuff like that. So you see here, we're just orientating. We're trying to always make sure that we're keeping our solar panels at least pointing semi in the direction of the suns, plural, because we want to make sure that we're getting electricity. And then we're going to do some little radial burns, radial in, radial out, just again to try and get this thing lined up nicely. And that is a lovely little weird picture. It looks like a centipede gone wrong in space. I'm sure the Kraken would love to get hold of it. So once we're into this sort of semi-stable orbit, now is the time to get these satellites done. So back to past me. Right, we are now ready to put these satellites into something like their final orbits. So how are we going to do this? Well, we want to space them out as evenly as possible. We know its current orbital period, and we want an orbital period similar to that when we finished it around these altitudes. The actual periaps and apoaps are not vastly important as long as the eccentricity, the circularness of the orbit is okay. But we want to get the same orbital period on all of these craft. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to put it into a slightly elliptical orbit where it's a longer orbit, and then at the periaps of each of those orbits we're going to release one of our craft, and it's going to circularize. So each one will circularize one orbit after each other, and hopefully that orbit will be a quarter of the way around the track. So what does that mean? How do we work that out? Well, we take our orbital period, we divide it by the number of satellites, and then we multiply it by the number of the satellites plus 1. Okay, so we've got 4 satellites, we take our orbital period, we divide it by 4, we then take that number, multiply it by 5, and that gives us our target sort of elliptical orbital period, and that's going to be about 1 hour 8 minutes and 16 seconds, because I want to try and do something with the orbit and fix it out a little bit. So we're going to do that now. We've put a little node in there, we're going to fast forward towards it, and we're going to try and get this done, and hopefully we're going to have signal, because I think KSC is going to be just under our periaps, which I think is going to be perfect. So hopefully we can do all of this with signal, because we're high enough now that we're going to be getting signal. So right, now is the difficult bit, isn't it? So we're gonna aim to face prograde, and there we go, there's the KSC. Right, so we've got about a minute to go. This could be about a 9-second burn. It's not vital that this is massively accurate. It would be nice if it was accurate, but again, we're not trying to refine this to perfection, because these craft are going to drift in their orbit. We don't have the machinery, the data to actually accurately position these perfectly. If we were going to use the MetJeb numbers, we could possibly, but the refinement of these craft is actually difficult with the engines we've got. I should have, we don't have a lot of RCS systems and things like that. RCS, that's a redundant S. We don't have a lot of RCS control nozzle choice and things like that. So this is our first attempt at a system. We're going to put more up. This is just the starting backbone of whatever we're doing. So this is going to be it. So we're going to move now, and we're going to just give it a little bit of time. Whoop, there we go. Right, so we're going to start our burn in about now. We're going to run it down. Here we go. And we're going to try and get close to what we want. All right, and then we're just going to throttle tiny little bit. There we go. So we're now looking for our time, and we've actually gone over it. I think, yeah, we've got 1 hour. In fact, you can see better here. 1 hour, where is it? 1 hour 26. So we actually need to turn back. We need to turn this craft round because we've overshot because we've gone with that marker. So this is one of the problems with maneuver nodes. If you're using prograde, retrograde, and then you do stuff like this, sometimes you can just over tap a little bit. So there we go. Just going to bring it back down. There we go. That's close enough. We can actually, I think, there we go. Perfect. So there we are. We are now into a position where we're ready to release our first craft. We're not going to do it this orbit though. We're gonna wait because we've now passed periap. So we're gonna go up to there. Oh, and we can't do that because we've got horrible time warpy problems. There we go. We've got electricity problems on a lot of our craft, so it's stopping us going round. I do really hate that. So we're just going to spin around here. You can see we're going to be cutting it tight, but hopefully once we've got craft that are actually going to communicate, we can actually have communications for this. And because of this resonance orbit, we can do pretty much what we want from now on. So we're going to decouple our first craft, and I'm actually going to this is a good one. I think we're going to actually put this onto the normal. Now, why am I going to put it onto normal? Because I don't want to actually, we're not quite in signal range yet. I'm going to put it onto the normal because I don't want to introduce any extra forces from, or normal or anti-normal, doesn't really matter, from our separations. And that could be problematic for both sets of craft. So there we go, it's going to stick it in the normal. The normal's going to mean that we get a slight inclination change, but as long as we're consistent, that's not a massive issue. So the first one that's going to go is going to be that one, is it? Yeah, so we're going to fire that off. We're going to change to it. And then it's going to go prograde. No, we're going to go retrograde. There we go. We're going to arm the RCS. And hopefully this is going to work. So we're aiming to get down to 54 minutes, 37 seconds. That's our aim for this craft. So let's see when we're going to approach our little marker here. So we've got about 4 minutes. We can accelerate towards it. I don't know how fast this actual thrust is going to be on this. I've not used the RCS in sort of stock Kerbal for so long. It's actually unbelievable. Right, we've got 3 minutes. We've got a bit more. We're right above the KSC here. It was a pity we're not doing geostationary, because if we're doing geostationary orbits from here, this would fix everything for us doing all of them. Right. And there we go. Now, the big issue, one of the reasons I've decided not to go geostationary is primarily lure. I don't know if lure is going to be in the way of a geostationary system. And I don't want to get tangled up in that whole situation, because it potentially is. If it's staying in that sort of position, which it looks like it is, or it's rotating very slowly, it's close to geostationary or rotostationary. So I don't want to go near that at the moment. I may, once we've actually explored lure a bit, but let's, I need to get some, there we go, we got that, that's good. So we can do this, we can bring this down all the way, and we're looking at 54 minutes 37 seconds. So it's going to take a while. Horrible little burnies. Look at that. Nice. I'm guessing that's the waterfall graphics on that's quite cool. 54. I'm looking for 54:37. I've gone too far. Turn back the other way. Turn back again. That's interesting. The orbital period is changing. There we go. So that's close enough. We're gonna knock off our RCS, and we're going to position this craft. We'll do the same as we've done with the others. Well, because you're going to put it up like that, because those dishes would be able to rotate out into different directions. So that we're going to assume they can do that, and this is going to sit there in its new orbit. So this is our first one. I'm going to speed you up and talk over the others, because otherwise you will go crazy. Right, so just like you, I didn't want to speak over the section, so I'm going to speed you a bit, and I'm going to talk over the top. So it is very much a case of rinse and repeat this process, and if you've ever tried to put a GPS system up in Kerbal, it's horrendous because it is just very repetitive. So what you'll see here is I'm taking one craft. I've already done the first one, and so this is the second one. We just watch this, and all we're doing is waiting until we get to the periaps, the bottom of our elliptical orbit, because that's going to be our final circularization point. We fire our RCS. I put 2 engines on there just because I think it looks better. And yeah, what I did notice was that actually, you definitely get some twist from the RCS, because I've not enabled it only for fore and aft, which you can do. It's actually, if it's not quite online, it will try and orientate itself using the RCS, not very efficiently, but then it affects your thrust, and it can throw you off a little bit. So we just move through, and every time I'm doing it, I'm renaming the craft as well. That's something that sometimes I forget to do, but I think it's really important, because when you come back and you've got to wonder why you've got all these craft with the same name, it's a little bit confusing, and putting them in normal orientation. So back to me. Right, so we have got our constellation around Rhode. We've got our 4 satellites nicely spaced out there in a sort of diamond pattern. You can see nicely spaced out, and signal is passing around them. You can see it's just skimming above the atmosphere there, so we've just got a lovely little height on it. We've got connection to the craft that we've got in orbit, which is really nice. Got the Artful 2 there, that's just got a nice signal. We do have a signal out to Armstrong, but that is not from our system. That is from the KSC, because we could have seen the signal there from that relay, but it's not, which means that our signal strength isn't probably big enough for that. However, this is just our sort of around the planet, close, low orbit pass thing, so we're going to upgrade this as we get better tech. But from me, until next time, have a great one.